Oh my god, he's got a knife.
What's going on here? Oh, shit, got a knife in it.
The data is out, and it exposes a crisis the government does not want you to see clearly. Knife crime statistics for England and Wales have just been released by police forces, and the numbers tell a story of regional chaos, youth violence spiralling in specific areas, and a criminal justice system that appears incapable of delivering consequences. In the year ending March 2025, there were approximately 53,000 recorded offences involving a sharp instrument. The Home Office wants you to focus on the fact this is marginally down from last year. But that figure conceals something far more disturbing. Because in multiple regions, knife crime is not falling. It is surging to levels never recorded before. 7 police force areas across England and Wales have reported record highs in blade offences, including Devon and Cornwall, Gwent, and parts of rural Middle England where violent crime was once rare. London recorded over 16,000 knife offences in the last year alone. Birmingham, with a rate of 156 offences per 100,000 population, sits just behind the capital. Manchester, Middlesbrough, and the West Midlands are not far behind. This is not an urban problem anymore. It is spreading. And here is what makes this moment particularly damning. While government ministers stand at dispatch boxes claiming progress, the Crown Prosecution Service has revealed that knife and offensive weapon offences dealt with by the criminal justice system increased by over 4% in the year ending March 2025. That represents a 26% rise over the last decade. Let that settle. Over 10 years, while politicians promised crackdowns, task forces, and tough sentencing, the system processed a quarter more blade offences than it did in 2015. The disconnect is staggering. In October 2025, Conservative MPs accused Labour of releasing dangerous criminals early to ease prison overcrowding. Labour responded by proposing tougher sentences for knife possession and sales to minors. Both parties pointed fingers. Neither addressed the fundamental issue. Sentencing has become inconsistent, enforcement patchy, and deterrence practically non-existent. In 2023, only 28% of individuals caught carrying a knife were sent to prison. That figure was 33% in 2018. Punishment is getting lighter, not harsher. Meanwhile, NHS hospital admissions for assault by sharp objects numbered 3,775 in the year ending 2023. Thousands more victims never made it into statistics because they did not report incidents to police or seek hospital treatment. The true scale of this violence remains hidden. This is not just about numbers. It is about lives destroyed and communities fractured. In the year ending March 2024, 262 people were killed using a knife or sharp instrument. That accounted for 46% of all homicides in England and Wales. Nearly half of all murders involved a blade. Among those victims, a disproportionate number were young people, many under 25, killed in street violence tied to gang disputes, postcode wars, and the collapse of youth intervention services. The timeline of policy failure is stark. Between 2010 and 2020, youth services across the UK were decimated by austerity cuts. Councils lost billions in funding. Youth centres closed. Mentorship programmes vanished. In their absence, gangs stepped in. County lines drug networks expanded. Vulnerable teenagers were recruited as runners, then as enforcers. Knife carrying became normalised as a means of protection, status, or survival. By 2019, knife crime had hit what was then described as a record high. Promises were made. Task forces launched. Then the pandemic struck. crime patterns shifted temporarily. When society reopened, blade violence returned with force. By 2024, offences were climbing again in targeted regions. The West Midlands recorded 175 knife offences per 100,000 residents, one of the highest rates in the country. In Newham, East London, 695 knife offences were recorded between January and October 2025 alone. Political pressure is mounting, but the response remains fragmented. In September 2024, Labour launched a coalition to tackle knife crime, bringing together campaign groups, families of victims, and community leaders. It was presented as a comprehensive strategy. But critics, including bereaved families and frontline youth workers, argue it fails to address root causes: poverty, inequality, lack of educational opportunities, and systemic mistrust between police and marginalised communities. The Conservative opposition has accused Labour of being soft on crime, pointing to early prisoner releases and reduced custodial sentences. Labour has countered by proposing enhanced penalties for businesses selling knives to minors and funding a national police coordination unit to crack down on illegal online knife sales. But neither party has committed to reversing the decade of cuts to youth services, mental health support, or community policing that created the vacuum gangs now occupy. In Parliament, debates have grown heated. MPs from knife crime hotspots demand action. Ministers cite falling homicide rates in some areas as evidence of progress. But the data is contradictory. Knife-enabled robberies are down 15% in task force areas since June 2024, yet overall knife and offensive weapon offences processed by courts are up. Hospital admissions for blade assaults have fallen in some regions, but remain stubbornly high in others. The picture is not one of control. It is one of chaos masked by selective statistics. The historical comparison is unavoidable. Britain once prided itself on low violent crime rates compared to other developed nations. Knife crime, while present, was not endemic. In the 1990s and early 2000s, offences involving blades were a fraction of current levels. The spike began in the mid-2010s, accelerated by austerity, and became entrenched through policy neglect. Other European nations have faced similar challenges, but responded with integrated prevention strategies. Scotland, once plagued by gang violence and knife crime, adopted a public health approach focused on early intervention, education, and community investment. Homicide rates in Glasgow plummeted. England and Wales have studied the model, but failed to replicate it at scale. The reasons are political. Prevention costs money upfront. It requires long-term commitment across electoral cycles. It does not deliver the immediate headlines that tough sentencing promises provide. And so the cycle continues. A teenager is stabbed. Media coverage surges. Politicians promise action. Sentencing guidelines are reviewed. Funding is announced for a new task force. Then attention shifts. The money does not materialize. Youth services remain underfunded. The next tragedy occurs. The consequences extend far beyond crime statistics. Knife violence is corroding trust in public institutions. Parents in affected communities no longer believe police can protect their children. Young people see gangs as more reliable sources of security than the state. Schools struggle to keep students safe without metal detectors and security patrols. Businesses in high-crime areas suffer as customers avoid certain neighbourhoods after dark. This is a crisis of legitimacy. When nearly half of all murders involve knives, when sentencing is inconsistent, when prevention is underfunded, and when political parties trade blame rather than solutions, the social contract fractures. Citizens begin to question whether the government has control, whether the criminal justice system functions, and whether their safety is a priority or an afterthought. The short-term political fallout is already visible. Labour's approval ratings on law and order have declined. Conservative MPs sense an opportunity to reclaim ground lost in the 2024 general election. But public frustration is not just aimed at the current government. It is directed at a decade and a half of failure by both major parties. Voters see knife crime as a symptom of deeper decay, inequality, underfunded services, and politicians who prioritise optics over outcomes. The long-term implications are even more troubling. If current trends continue, knife crime will become a defining feature of British life, particularly for young people in urban and increasingly suburban areas. The normalisation of blade carrying among teenagers is already evident in school exclusion data, stop and search statistics, and youth justice records. A generation is growing up in environments where violence is a daily risk, trust in authority is absent, and prospects for escape are limited. This has electoral consequences. Communities most affected by knife crime are also those where voter turnout is lowest and disillusionment with mainstream politics is highest. Labour won the 2024 election promising to be tough on crime and its causes. If knife violence persists or worsens, that mandate erodes. The Conservative opposition will exploit every failure. But they offer no alternative beyond harsher sentences, which evidence shows have limited deterrent effect without prevention and enforcement. The democratic implications run deeper. When the state cannot protect its citizens from endemic violence, when communities lose faith in policing, and when young people see no future beyond survival, the foundations of civil society weaken. This is not hyperbole. It is the trajectory Britain is on unless policy changes fundamentally. The most damaging revelation in the latest data is not the total number of offences. It is the regional variation. In some areas, knife crime is falling. In others, it is surging. This suggests the problem is not uniform, but tied to specific local failures, inadequate policing resources, collapsed youth services, gang entrenchment, or weak community networks. Yet national policy remains blunt and generic. London's Metropolitan Police claim knife crime in the capital is down compared to 2024. But Newham alone recorded 695 offences in 10 months. Birmingham's West Midlands Force reports one of the highest rates in the country. Devon and Cornwall, traditionally low-crime rural areas, have seen record highs. The pattern is clear. Knife violence is not receding. It is shifting, adapting, and embedding itself in new territories. And the government's response? A coalition. A task force. Promises of tougher sentences for knife sales. These are not solutions. They are gestures designed to deflect scrutiny and buy time until the next crisis distracts public attention. Meanwhile, families bury their children. Hospitals treat stab wounds. Police arrest offenders who are released months later. The cycle repeats. This is the reality the emergency data release exposes. Knife crime in England and Wales is not under control. It is being managed, spun, and repackaged to appear less catastrophic than it is. The statistics are contradictory because the crisis is complex, the response is fragmented, and political accountability is absent. What happens next will define Britain's trajectory. If the government prioritises prevention, funds youth services, rebuilds community policing, and addresses inequality, knife crime can be reduced. Scotland proved it is possible. But if the focus remains on reactive enforcement, selective statistics, and political blame shifting, the violence will continue. More teenagers will carry knives. More families will lose children. More communities will lose hope. And the worst part? The public knows this. They see through the spin. They recognize the failure. They are angry, not just at knife crime, but at the system that has allowed it to become normalized. That anger is not going away. It will shape elections, erode trust, and fuel demands for accountability that politicians can no longer ignore. The data is out. The crisis is real. The question is whether those in power will finally act, or whether they will wait for the next tragedy to force their hand. Because one thing is certain, the next tragedy is coming. The only question is when.